Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Joseph Mella. Before we begin I want to make sure we're recording. Jason, are we all set? Up in the booth? Hopefully we are all ready to roll. My name is Joseph Mella, Director and Curator of the Galleries at the Herron School of Art and Design. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the 2022 Kerry, Dinneen, and Samuel Sutphin Visiting Artist Lecture with James O. Clark. In a moment, Jim will be joining us well, he's actually up there in the corner. You can see him lurking up in the corner. He's actually zooming in from a small public library outside of in Eastern Pennsylvania, where he goes during the summer. He's teaches at SVA and hasn't started school yet. So that aside, this event, taking the form of a conversation I will hold with the artist, will also end with a virtual tour of the exhibition Illumination, the sculpture of James O. Clark. I want to note that at the end of this evening's program, there'll be opportunity for our in-person and remote audiences to ask questions of the artist. At the bottom of the screen, for those who are online, there should be a Q&A button that you can type in your questions, and we'd love to hear from you. Reception in the Grand Hall, just outside the Basile Auditorium, will follow. This evening's event also marks the beginning of the academic year at Herron and IUPUI, as well as the launch of the gallery's fall season. We are so fortunate to have our featured artist join us this evening as we examine his singular practice as a sculptor in a career now spanning over 50 years. Before we continue, I'd like to take a moment and thank those who have played a role in realizing this exhibition. I offer my deepest gratitude to the gallery's exhibition managers, April Knauber and Peyton Healy, who are with us this evening. Our team of returning students, Veronica Breach, who I think is in the audience this evening too as well. I was so happy to see her. Jane Sun Kim and Mazzy Booth, as well as new members to the team, Kelsey Connor, Mackenzie Gosley, and Meredith Marshall. Thank you all. I'd also like to thank Whitney Yoger and Amy Holrock, Herron's marketing and communications team, for all their hard work in promoting the galleries and its programs. And really a remarkable opportunity, or remarkable privilege, should I say, to work with these two women. My thanks also to Kim Hodges, Herron's Director of Development, for her work in supporting our efforts at the galleries, as well as our Dean, Greg Hull, for his outstanding leadership. Additionally, I'd like to thank Jeff Rogers, Jordan Cleland, and Indiana University's IU 3D team for their outstanding work that once again has culminated in the state-of-the-art virtual reality experiences that you'll see momentarily this evening. This exhibition is organized by the Clara M. Eagle Gallery, Murray State University, and curated by its director, T. Michael Martin, and is supported by the Creative Motif Fund, New York. Complimentary parking this evening is made possible by the Great Frame Up, Indianapolis. Virtual reality presentations for Herron galleries are made possible with support by an anonymous donor. We also want to acknowledge Hotel Indy, our lodging sponsor, again this semester. All of our artists come in and stay at this wonderful boutique hotel in Indianapolis, and we're so thrilled that they continue to support us in this manner. Before we jump into this evening's program, I want to mention that on the evening of Wednesday, September 28th, we will be joined by the highly recognized artist, Sonia Clark, who will deliver a lecture titled Monumental Histories from Dust. Clark's talk will be held in conjunction with the opening of Past is Present. Black artists respond to the complicated histories of slavery, that will span all galleries here in Eskenazi Hall. This landmark exhibition explores the legacy of slavery in Indiana and beyond, and includes contributions from Indianapolis-based and nationally renowned artists, displayed in dialogue alongside historical objects and documents from the State Museum, from the Historical Society, from state archives and other institutions. Paintings, sculpture, prints, digital projections, textile art, and several mixed media work will be on display. Keep an eye out for a new webpage that will be dedicated to the exhibition and the surrounding public programs, which will launch any day now. And they'll be quite robust as far as what's going on. There's a play that the galleries have commissioned with the Africana Repertory Theater. There's going to be a panel discussion tied in with Spirit and Place and lots more. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce James O. Clark. Clark earned a Bachelor of Science degree in 1974 from Kutztown University in Pennsylvania. He has exhibited at institutions such as the Morris Museum in New Jersey, Max Protech Gallery in New York, the Sideshow Gallery in Chicago, and the New Museum in New York, among others. Clark has also earned awards and honoraria from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Guggenheim Memorial Foundation, and the Pollock Krasner Foundation. He is a member of American Abstract Artists and was nominated by Lisa Phillips, director of the New Museum, for Who's Who in America in 2004. Clark currently resides and works in Brooklyn, New York, and is a professor at New York City's School of Visual Arts. Please join me in welcoming Jim Clark. I am going to, at some point, I don't think I need to do it right away, eventually launch a small PowerPoint that'll kind of be a companion, and then eventually we're going to jump into the VR. But Jim, you can hear us, I assume?
I can hear you fine, yep.
Beautiful, all right. So Jim, your practice has its roots in several disparate influences and experiences. From classes as a young student at Kutztown State College, where you met Richard Serra, who was an early supporter, to creating parts for the D825 computers, one of the first multiprocessors while at Great Valley Labs in Pennsylvania, to working for the Reading Railroad as a brakeman during your summer months in college. I don't know about anyone here in the audience or beyond, but you know, my summer jobs were far less exotic than riding the rails, you know, which sounds so incredible. Although when I was a kid in college, I worked as a horse wrangler at a Boy Scout camp in northern Wisconsin, which certainly had its moments as well. So, you know, as you've noted in the past, the railroad gig, as I could call it, gave you opportunities to collect scraps of metal found along the tracks that you used as raw sculpture that became part of your first sculptures in 1971. Even before these years, I think of what it would mean to grow up in Coatesville, Pennsylvania, the home of Lucan Steel, the oldest steel mill in commission, as well as the National Iron and Steel Heritage Museum. Is it perhaps too big of a leap to think that your hometown in some way had led you to study art and specifically sculpture?
Not really, no. I wouldn't say that it was a big leap at all because, you know, all along I wanted to be an artist ever since I was 6 years old. And, you know, the area didn't harbor art as much as like Andrew Wyeth, those type of, you know, artists. And, you know, it was always a burning desire in my life to be an artist.
What, you know, basically back to your time on the railroad, let's see, you let's see, what was I going to say? Tell us about, you know, you were a little bit of more of an unconventional student in that you served in the Army from 1968 to 1970. And then you, while in school, you're doing jobs such as in the summer, I assume is when you worked for the railroad. But then you also installed and deinstalled neon and fluorescent lights to help pay for college at Kutztown. In a statement you shared with me yesterday, you said that that was a major turning point for you as an artist. and that it led to you incorporating light within your work. Tell us about what appears to be a real aha moment for you as a young artist and how that kind of happened.
Well, when I was in, I didn't start at Kutztown. I started at Westchester State University, which was in Westchester, Pennsylvania. And the sculptor there was named Billy Newman. He introduced me to Harry Vittoria. So I didn't work part-time on the railroad. I actually worked full-time and went to full-time classes. So I was doing a lot of metal welding and things like that. Then I transferred my energy into working with light.
Right now, we're looking at actually one of the earlier pieces. In fact, maybe the earliest piece in the exhibition across the hallway. You know, and I'm looking at you know, at some of your comments that you've made on light as a material, and you say the following: light as a material has illuminated my creative search. I continue to be captivated by the mysterious dialogue between light and form. Light is not part of our life. It is the core magic of our life. At the center of our universe, life's energy. Light has a language of its own and speaks in many tones and volumes with endless musical notes. Its reflection and refraction properties create a uniquely mysterious conversation. Light is ephemeral as it dances and changes, composing space, defines, reflects, refracts, bends, and teases the volume in massive forms. While light is indeed central to your practice, it seems to me that the mechanics of light and how you have manipulated it have been a long time fascination for you. It goes back to your early years as an artist. And I'm showing, as I mentioned earlier here, one of the earlier pieces that's on view in the show, what I think of as kind of a twisted manipulation of commercial fluorescent light fixtures, humorously titled Tibia Plateau, which is actually a bone part. It's the part where the femur rests on in your leg. A reference to joints and bones in the human body. And I'm also thinking of shows like this one in LA in 2015, where you convinced the gallery to have you go in and rip out all their lighting and do what you see here with it. You know, can you have, I think, one more slide? This is probably a better one. Can you talk about these works and others that to me seem like, you know, kind of architectural or spatial interventions?
Well, I wanted to get away from working like, you know, I wanted this in this situation. The gallerist came to me and she showed me her space and she wanted me to do a piece in her gallery. So what I did was I looked at the photos of the space. She shared them with me and I said, I need to sleep on this. So I started thinking about the lights were on the ceiling. And I thought, well, I can repurpose these lights and put them on switches. And if you look to the top of your screen here, you can see the shadows. So there was a ghost of where they were. And then I brought them down and I put motion switches on them. So as you walk through the space, the pieces turned on and they shut off. But then I also, which you can't see in this photograph, is when they're off, they're painted with a phosphorescent pigment. So there's an afterglow. So you, the viewer, the audience, become part of the piece as you walk through it.
Nice. And in the corner, am I not mistaken, is that earlier piece?
Yes, it is. What happened was she wanted to bring something from my studio in there. And this whole twisting of fixtures, I started that in the late 80s, early 90s. I was using plumber's tools and I made up a jig so I could twist them. And there's a couple of these pieces that are out in the world. And one of them is called Ankle Deep. And I gave that name, I got that name from Ronald Bladen, who actually said he was at Yale looking at students' work and it was all ankle deep. And I went, oh, that's a great title for a piece. So I twisted the fixture and the ballast that triggers the lights on these earlier pieces is in the center. So it became the ballast for the piece to keep it suspended in space. It actually went up in space as it did. And this piece was part of that series, except I twisted it, and then I wasn't just happy twisting it. I cut it and I repurposed it into another direction. So it goes into the corner, but it doesn't occupy this corner. It's filling the space up in a different way.
Nice. And yeah, we'll take a closer look at that piece too when we jump into the VR later. And those in the audience after this program, jump across the gallery. It's the first piece as you walk in. Before we take a look at your show at Herron, I wanted to give our audience a better sense of the expansive nature of your practice. You've often observed that your approach to art making is the product of collaborating with your materials in an open-ended process that allows for chance and discovery. James Yao, when reviewing your first New York solo show way back in 1978 at Max Protech, made several astute observations regarding your work that still ring true today. And I'm going to tee up this very first piece. I think this is the one you were telling me about, titled Hermes. Is that correct, Jim?
That is correct.
That is
And that
correct.
was a piece that was shown at the new museum.
At the new museum as well?
Yes. And
Fantastic.
I actually called Billy Kluver about this piece because Billy Kluver was with experimental art and technology. And I said to him, how do I, because the inflatable structures are inflated by that tank. And they're actually, there's a line that goes down on the blue one to a box, and it has a micro switch that as they blow up, it turns off the gas going into it. The neon pieces are individual pieces in each inflatable structure. And it basically, at the time, I just moved to New York and I was doing plumbing, and it worked the same way as a ball cock does and it's a toilet. And when it lifts up, it fills, the water lifts up and it gets so high and it shuts off the water flow. And I was looking at that, thinking about that, and Billy Kluver said to me at the time, you can't do what you're trying to do. But he didn't think about he was thinking about the technology, and I was thinking about using simple items to do the massive work that had to be done.
And I think that's, kind of characteristic of your kind of Rube Goldbergian approach to making art, where you look around, you figure out what you see, or you see something. I know later on when we do the VR, we're going to jump into one of the galleries that has this inflatable tube with a yellow light inside. And if I'm not mistaken, you got that idea from seeing those big vents coming out of buildings that were under construction. That
Right, to get fresh air into the buildings,
yeah,
true.
getting fresh air into the buildings and such. And then you thought, oh, well, why not use this as a tool to making something really kind of interesting, I think.
Right. But being an artist, Joseph, is a 24/7, you're committed totally in your sleep, in your wake. So you're always thinking about what you're making.
Right. But I think it's that, and we've said it earlier, not to overdwell on the point, but I think it's that background and naturally working with your hands and constructing things and looking at things that kind of even probably predating your years as an artist that help kind of inform how you go about making art. I'm going to quote from Jim Yao. James O. Clark works in a manner that evokes the mad scientist, the visionary tinkerer, and the jazz soloist. At a moment when, this is back in 1978, so think back then if you can, at a moment when much sculpture consisted of either accumulations of found or store-bought objects or three-dimensional reprisals of others' artists' work, Clark's often kinetic sculptures dispel the conformist notion that there is nothing left to do in the artistic arena but to criticize consumerism. Clark appears to not only have been affected by much of not to have been affected by much of what's happening during the 80s, either in art or critical discourse. His work neither partakes of this dominant aesthetic nor reacts against it. He seems to have resisted all repressive ideas and academic paradigms honored during the 80s. Indeed, his well thought out, internally logical sculptures seem to have arrived from another planet, as you can see here. I'm not sure. I think that would qualify. Yao continued by noting that Clark has a preference for the discarded, the unattractive, the bland, the blemished. His ingenious structuring of these materials recalls Walter Pater's dictum that art should, quote, aspire to the condition of music, unquote, evoking its self-sufficient syntax. There is a variousness to Clark's sculpture that suggests that each piece is a result of the artist's engagement with the materials at hand. Thus, in contradiction to much of the work that achieved prominence in the 80s, Clark's has no fixed style, nor is it guided by a predetermined viewpoint. Instead, the work is experimental, demanding the viewer's engagement, unquote. Just yesterday, Jim, you talked about, or you spoke about your blue collar roots, which made me again think about how you approach material with a total, at least I think what appears to be a total lack of hierarchy, meaning that the most simple pedestrian material is on equal footing with what you would consider as, what one would consider as artist materials that are far more refined. Can you take a detour into materials and the range of stuff that you've worked with, both in light and other media, as a self-described fabricator, for us to expand upon Yao's observation that, quote, each piece is a result of the artist's engagement with the materials at hand?
Well, when I was, when I finished up college, it was all very conceptual. We weren't taught very much about tools. When I relocated New York City, I was basically thrown into a situation where I had to figure out how to put things together. And I was very fortunate because I met a lot of artists of like minds. I met Bill Jensen, Guy Goodwin, actually Kiki Smith. They all moved in the same building as I got, and it was like, there was just a shell. There was a hole in the roof. There was no plumbing, no heating, no water, no electricity. So I had to learn all these crafts to survive. But also, you can't separate what you do in life from what you create. So I was able to filter some of my hands-on work into my reality,
Nice. And I guess if you expand upon that more. I mean, when you were landed in New York, you're doing stuff, you're making objects. Your first show was in '78. You came to New York in what year?
77.
77. So right after you got to New York, you got a show at Max Protect. That's not
No,
too
no,
bad.
it was at the new museum.
That was at the new museum? Okay.
Yeah, and that was when Marcia Tucker was running it. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Fantastic.
And this piece was in that show. It's a disc that's floating in water, and there's an argon light underneath it. So you get the illusion of a black hole.
Oh, wow.
But I was starting to use water a lot. I did that in Pennsylvania. I brought that aesthetic with me to New York.
And is this, what are we looking at? Is this like a pool that this is floating in, or?
Yes, it's a pool. It's out. This piece is actually in Pennsylvania, and this piece was shown in Pennsylvania. But I built a structure for it in New York, and I put it in I put a polyethylene structure with 1x3s around like a square, and put this in the center. So you could read the mass of water running around it too.
And what are these plants? What are we looking at surrounding it?
It's like algae. It's algae. Yeah.
Okay. And what's its title?
It's at that point it was called Untitled.
Thank
How
you.
could you title it
How could
anything
you
else?
title? I don't know. You come up with some really interesting titles.
Well, this actually became Black Hole because it actually became like a black hole
like a black
for
hole.
people. It's like sometimes the audience is involved in titling pieces. And I've had that happen more than once, but like, again, I'll cite Blade, and the Three Elements was untitled, but so many people kept calling it Three Elements, it became the title.
And it also reminds me of James Turrell and his experiments with light and black shapes or shapes, and how I'm thinking of the structures where you enter inside and you look up and there's an oculus, and as night falls outside, the reaction of that night sky with the interior light, you get this rich black velvet black
Right.
that you've never seen a black so black in your life, kind of black. I'm going to jump in to the VR here, and we can kind of go through the exhibit a little bit, especially for those who haven't seen the show yet, or are seeing this remotely. And the lighting here is very different from actually the lighting once you get into the gallery. But this is, in fact, the first piece that we talked about earlier. And I don't know how much more we need to say about it, other than you were making these, everything going okay? Sure. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. All right, let me back out of here. All right. Here. Click on share screen, right? Yeah. And then go over to Chrome. Right here. I'm sorry. Thank God for Jason Gross, who is our technical guru here. So we're back in again. So again, I don't know how much more we need to say about this piece, but how many of these kinds of works were done at that time? This has a date range of 1993 to 2011. And talk a little bit about that date range too as well.
Well, because a woman wanted to bring the dates of the modern work that I did in LA and incorporate this piece. So this was the 93 piece, and the date of the show was that. So that's how she transferred the dates.
Okay.
It actually was done in, like you say, 1993, but I made like a series of about 6 or 7 of these, I think.
And
So,
so,
you know,
but the show in LA was in 2015, right? Or no?
right. And that show, this piece was part of that 1993 to 2015. That's how she titled it, the show.
Okay. All right. Backing out here. Please forgive me if I'm not the best driver. Do it. And we'll move into this piece. Sometimes it's easier to pull up the actual piece. So you can see it here. And this is a work. Let me see if I get a better angle on it. This is a work called Sexy. And I guess I could say from the ask the audience here, what do you think we're looking at? Any ideas? I'm sorry? Lipstick, yeah. Lipstick indeed. Tell us a little bit about this piece. This was done relatively recently. I can get this to now.
Well, it's the line of light on the top. As a viewer comes into it, that line opens and closes as you walk around the piece. It engages the viewer to do that. The line, the oval on the top, it actually disappears at one point and then it doesn't. And and then it's the UV lights are mirroring themselves inside of the cylinder shape. It has a little bit of a conversation with the first piece you showed, Hermes, because as a viewer walked around Hermes, their body displaced the space and the air would make the piece move. This piece is more of a visual thing that as you walk around it, you actually, the line opens and closes visually.
And this, you're talking about these lines that are.
I'm
up
talking
here.
about the oval shape, the lit up oval, yeah.
The oval shape, yeah.
I mean, at one point it completely disappears and then it reopens up again. But the viewer makes that happen. It doesn't do it on its own. It's by their active moving around it. It's a sculpture. You move around it and it it invites you in and takes you out.
Why isn't this? That technology is. And then this piece, which is light activated. Like you talked about one of your earlier pieces that has the same kind of functioning. And I'll pull this open, called Moonbow.
Right.
This is just a couple years ago, 2017. Actually, the image not loading, but we can see it right here.
Well, I can talk a little bit about what Moonbow means. When I was a child, there was a fellow from Kentucky who was a neighbor, and he would talk about moonbows. So in other words, instead of rainbows at nighttime, there'll be these moonbows. And there's actually one in Corbin Falls, Kentucky, that you can go and see these at certain times. And there's another place in Zimbabwe. So I thought Moonbow would be a good thing because the lights are moving around in it. And it was actually reflecting back to that, the idea of it being, instead of a rainbow, a moonbow. So, just has that kind of thing. And again, it has a motion switch on it that triggers. So it greets you when you come to it.
That is right here. Right here in the middle.
Yeah.
We'll keep moving. I don't think we're going to look at everything, but I want to look at some of these here. This is a series, green, blue, and yellow vinyl, and you're using electroluminescent wire in these things, and you've experimented a fair amount with this type of material, right?
Yes, I have. And, and putting it, I use that line to define the edge of the form that I bent. All these are hand bent. And then with the vinyl over them, I wanted to make a cocoon for the whole form. It's anodized metal. And the edge has a line, is all defined by the light.
If I get back out here. I'm going to start getting a sense of vertigo here if I start moving around too much. These are really interesting too. This suite titled Kiss, and then the other one. Oops. I can't. Let me get to the full screen here again. Tasty, and then the final one onto the right. Cherry. Tell us about these three works, Jim.
Well, they're vinyl. I manipulated the vinyl, and I wanted to put the light, the cold cathodes, which is a different. See, what's really important is that after year 2000, technology and lighting really went wild. I mean, we started using LEDs, we started using cold cathode lights, and a lot of fiber optic stuff started being introduced. So I'm trying to get away from using glass and using other products that have this it's just a filter, like a fine line there with a filament in it that lights up. So these pieces are just like little maquettes, but at the same time, they could be much larger. Anyway, they would just, I just bent the material and it felt right. And I thought, well, you know what? It's the way it should be. The material started really having a voice of its own with these pieces.
And you would kind of clip them together in this shape that we see, these shapes that we see. right? Aren't they joined they're joined kind of at the top in different ways?
Yeah, and also it's the idea of them, the reflecting of the light into them, like, so the light dances in them. As you walk around, that light moves around the interior and the exterior of the piece. So they have this thing they're like, they're not naked. They're more like negligees on the piece. So you kind of don't see the whole thing. But you see bits and pieces of it, as you move
around.
through it.
Nice. This is quite interesting, this piece here. Flocation.
Flocking, yeah. Flocking it's a metal, it's metal with a spray flocking on it, and then I incorporated the vinyl into it and lights on both sides. And the light as it went through the vinyl changes color, which is. And again, this is a new product. This is more with electronic ballast, which I'm not as familiar with, but the electronic ballast versus the old ballast they used to use for argon and neon lighting, that's become a thing of the past.
Another view there. Not going to be able to show everything here, but this I think is really one of the central pieces in the exhibition. Your luminiferous ether or aether,
Right.
which is again back to names, and I was like Googling this and think, what is this? What is he talking about here? And I found out that the early physicists, not giving me an image. There's a glitch going on with the Matterport technology. I talked to my tech people today. Normally you'd see a picture here, but in any case, I guess early physicists that believe that light traveled through what they call the luminiferous ether. And in 1887, two American scientists, Albert Michelson and Edward Morley, built a device known as the interferometer, which they hope would enable them to prove the existence of this ether. But I won't give it all away, Jim, but
No, you're doing a great job. I mean, you're doing,
turned out to be not. I guess then Albert Einstein came along in 1905 and proved everything. That's not the case, but it's a magical piece itself too, as well, and it's an early work too, isn't it? It's
well, somewhat.
1995.
Yeah.
To
and
2011.
What's really was important to me that whoever installs the piece or owns the piece besides me, it's temporary, but it's not, because you become part of the piece as you are engaged in inflating it. And and then there's all this, what the colors reflecting and refracting in the piece. So the viewer becomes part of the participant in this particular piece. And they're tricky, as you've lived with them. They're really, they're like Leonardo da Vinci said it best: art is an unjealous lover. These demand your attention and your passion for them. If you're not there, then they're not going to work for you, that way. But that's what, it's the idea of the viewer becoming a participant in it is important to the whole piece.
And balloons deflate over time, as we learned. We all know that as children too. You get a balloon, a week later that's very small in your bedroom. So we had to continually fill up new balloons.
Yeah, it's ozone. Right? It's a whole. They're sensitive. They're much more sensitive, and their sensitivity should give the viewer acknowledge their sensitivity, because these are fragile, and we don't think of ourselves as being fragile, but they're about that too. There's about this whole dynamic, a symbiotic relationship to the viewer.
Nice. Well, it's a tricky little piece, as some of these are. The wiring is very very sensitive. We had to do some rewiring here. I'm going to swing around to the other side of this wall and look at a couple of, I think, interesting pieces. God, this is not working. We can still see them. Apparently the software, no, went into a reboot recently, according to our tech people in IU3D, and some of the images aren't loading. But talk about this pair of sculptures, if you could, Jim.
Okay, one of them is the argon light inside of the sleeve. The other one is actually LED that's in a silicone tube, and it's cast in the tube. So I
That's this
physically
one.
manipulated that one. That's the one. I manipulate it with my hands and tie a knot, and then I put it inside this membrane. Actually, it's a like it's a mirrored. It's mirrored, not plexiglass. Actually, it's vinyl. So you can
Mylar.
Mylar, yeah, and you can see through. You can see through it. It's really, it has a dynamic that you can see through the skin into the piece, and as you walk around, it reflects and it mirrors itself. But it also gives you. It's almost like a two-way mirror, but it's that thin membrane of. It's a very thin membrane of mylar.
These are both incredibly beautiful pieces. This one is best viewed from over here, if I can. Oh, yeah. Really remarkable. Yeah, and I think as you've observed too, because the very nature of light and how you work with these things, it changes as you kind of work around them, walk around them, experience them.
That's what
They all-
sculpture should do. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm, a blind squirrel gets an acorn once in a while, and that's when you hit on one. It's really quite. It's a magical moment, for the creator as well as the viewer.
Glitch here again, but this is a piece called Rune, which utilizes the same kind of materials that those three orange or yellow ones used. Vinyl material that you kind of puncture with the argon light, right?
Right, and this one is like the vinyl is holding up the form.
Right.
And that's like, and it's dancing on the floor, which, was really important, that I was able to wiggle it so it would structurally hold up the light.
Yeah, it's a remarkable piece. I am going to.
Thank you.
There and then go. Other. Take a walk down the hall here. And we're going to end in this gallery. This is the Basile Gallery around the corner from Berkshire Reese and Paul. And I really didn't mention at the beginning. Well, we did talk a little bit about this sculpture, which actually has changed color dramatically during the rendering of this image. It's actually quite bright yellow, but it's utilizing that same plastic tubing that's used in ventilation, correct?
That is correct. It's a 12-inch polyethylene tubing. And what's nice about polyethylene is you can heat seal it, but it doesn't give you a translucent quality. That's better, much better photograph.
That's how it looks.
And I actually have a gun that I can crimp it so you get those top part. And then I put a lot of the tube itself is I wanted to get like Flavin's work was all fluorescent, and what I have is I have a polycarbonate sleeve over that light, and I painted the sleeve, and what that does is it reflects it breaks the light coming through the sleeve, and it also gives you can change this bulb. It's a white bulb inside of that polycarbonate sleeve, and I was able to use polycarbonate because I don't have to buy like certain color lights. I can use the sleeves to change the colors. And you want to talk about the title for that?
Yeah.
Joseph?
Yeah, tell me about the title again.
It's called Skin Ego.
Skin
And,
Ego.
they've been doing some psychological studies on people, and the viewers are going to have to research it because it's a nice, it works for this piece. And it also, it's another discovery from a psychological level.
And I didn't really mention it in my introduction, but you know, you collaborated with with a chicken at one point, didn't you?
Well, I did a whole show with chickens, and that, you know, like your introduction, your photograph from the beginning. Here's the video.
So tell us what we're looking at.
Well, you're looking at a soft piece of copper, ground soft copper, with a surface over it, and the chicken's put in on the copper, and she's making the etching that's in the show.
So the copper plate is covered in a varnish, and then she's going in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then there's prints pulled from that. And, you know, I did a show with chickens, and I put a camera on the chicken's back, and then this was a follow-up, you know. And the chickens, I wanted to show that, I wanted to set up an arena taken from John Cage, you know, Merce coming in, the idea of having let the freedom of happen.
Hold on, there's
So-
a plane going over.
Anyway.
There you go.
So the show was, it had chickens running around. I tie-dyed a bunch of chickens, and, you know, it was all natural. Nothing got, no chickens got hurt, but the black chicken was carrying a camera. So she was able to document the whole show, the exhibition.
And the end result is this, is a print, which actually it looks a little better just on the wall. And there's your etching. And so how many of these prints did you do?
I did 30 from this one,
did
30
30.
from this.
And you've done a whole show of just these chicken prints?
Yeah, I did that a while back. It was called Poultry in Motion. And and the gallerist she didn't know what she was getting into, but, you know, New York City is a chicken friendly city. So
Yeah.
I was allowed to have chickens in the city. And ironically enough, it was right beside Leo Castelli's first gallery up on 77th Street. And I had a bunch of live chickens. All of them were tie-dyed except for the black one. And I put a camera, so it was chicken cam, and she was photographing the whole show. And then I had some, you know, so I did an outdoor installation with bubble machines that were colored bubbles. The colors would land on you, but the color would disappear. So you wouldn't get the, you know, you thought you were getting paint on you, but you weren't. And then there was a fiber optic piece in that show. And then there was another, like a fountain piece that it was high in the air, and it would put out mist and would create a rainbow. And then there was another piece in the corner, which you're not going to see, of course. It was a barbecue that had live goldfish in it, and they were swimming around. And then there was a singing fish that I put a fur coat on. Anyway, so.
Well, that sounds pretty simple.
Yeah, it was very, it was different, I'll tell you. And, you know, the critics ran away from that one.
Well, I'm going to stop the share, and I don't know if there are any questions in the Q&A or not. There are no questions there. Do we have any questions from the audience here tonight? And I think we have microphones. Yeah, there's Peyton. He can help you.
I find your illuminations fascinating. My favorite work at the IMA was an illuminated sculpture by James Turrell called Acton. I was wondering if you're acquainted with that artist.
Oh, absolutely. I met Terrell. I was teaching at Brandeis, and he came into the library, and I was in the library like I'm now, and he said, "Hi, I'm Jim." And I said, "No, I'm Jim." He said, "You're Jim?" I said, "No, you're Jim." So that was the moment we started bonding, and you know, anyway, he gave a great lecture, and you know, so we met, and it was pretty, it was one of those moments where all the stars lined up and we clicked. You know, it was a terrific artist.
Anyone else?
Can you hear me with my mask on?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I had a couple questions. The first one is I understand you worked with Richard Serra, or he was an early, and can you say how that affected your work? Because I could so many of your shapes reminded me of his huge, big sculptures. And I was thinking how cool some of those would have been if there was light inside them. So I just wanted you to talk about that relationship. And then my second question was, why chickens, and how does that relate to the rest of your work?
Wow, there's a lot of questions.
Yeah.
The thing is that I never worked for Richard Serra. He came down to the college, and I was a student there, and I was doing some work there, and I did a piece with water and light, and it wasn't working. And Richard said to me, and I came out of water and I was soaking wet, maybe half loaded. And Richard said, you know, you remind me of a friend of mine. And I said, what do you mean? He said, you're acting just like he was acting. And I said, what was he doing? He said he was putting stakes in the water, trying to figure out how to pour the stone. And I realized at that moment he was talking about Robert Smithson. And he was very involved with Robert Smithson. They were good friends. But I did come, when I came back to New York City, or came to New York City, I did meet him. And you know, we sat in a bar and had a few drinks, but I never really worked for him. I have close friends, Alan Glatter and Tom Bills, who worked with him, who one of them still does work with Richard, but I never did. And you know, I I like to be around the oak trees, but I don't want to be in their shadow.
But your shapes, you don't feel that your shapes relate to some of the shapes of his large sculptures?
Possibly, yeah. I mean, you know, it's a lot of that's, I mean, some forms kind of repeat themselves through history. And, you know, you take them another step further, you know. But I understand, I know what you're saying about those forms and how they stand. I'd say the way he draws a line on the floor, or when you think of the line departing from the floor, we're a little bit different. He uses a gesture to hold up the form, and I'm actually not just, I'm more concerned about the light as a mass rather than the steel itself. And he works for steel. I'm more interested in the work of, like, say, Harry Vittoria or somewhere like that has more of a linear approach to making art.
Thank you. And then the chickens.
Okay, now you're really throwing me well, the woman gave me full credentials to do what I wanted to do. And I had that happen before with another show, which was a show that was before this by about 5 years, I think. It was called Tulips Hysteria Coordinating, where I did the show revolving around Duchamp. And Duchamp was supposed to put this painting in a show in the Armory. It was called Tulips Hysteria Coordinating. Instead, he put the Armut sculpture, the urinal. So I put a urinal in the show floating in water with Armut in it. And then you walked into the gallery, and as you walked into the space, there was all this light over your head. So at that point, I realized that the viewers should be more involved in the experience. So when the woman gave me free rein to do what I wanted to at the gallery, God bless her, I took it to the max. And the fellow at the gallery, the assistant, said to me, this is, you know, like, he was on my team, and he said, you know, this is going to work, but you got to, like, so I had all the credentials ready for her. And I wanted to do something like, I used John Cage as an example of me stepping back and letting the art have its own say and the people being participate in it. So I wanted to, I want freedom, and I wanted to create freedom for the viewer as well as, myself. So the chickens walking around, and, it was just bizarre. It was perfect. I mean, like, it didn't get it got very little attention, art world attention, but it's the only piece I ever did that my students still talk about. Anytime they hear about the chickens is like, W.C. Fields said it best. He said, there's two things I won't work with: children and animals, because they'll steal the show. So this chicken stole the show. Does
Anyone
that
else?
help? Does that help?
That does, it just doesn't relate to the light so much, so.
Well, there was light in there because it was like, with the bubbles and all that going on. And actually it was live streamed. So as you were in the show, it was live streaming on the wall. So you were seeing, the chicken was photographing you. So it was,
Okay.
the light was still being projected on the wall.
Thank you.
You're quite welcome.
We really should have grabbed a video of that. That sounds great. Darn it.
I'm wondering if you would comment on LED lighting, which is being used in so many different places nowadays and is available in ribbon form and every
Yes.
conceivable color, and wondering if you've thought about using that in your art and what you think about that type of light in general.
Well, I actually, there's a sign man that I go to get some materials from, and he uses that LED impregnated in the silicone. That one piece that you saw, Corsorate, has that in it. And I'm doing a bunch of pieces right now that instead of using fluorescence, I'm using the LED lights in them. So yeah, I'm very interested in that. It has a tricky edge to it. It's because there's spots. You have to really be able to make it like a uniform line if you're going to use them, because they become like little pixels. And I'm not interested in little pixels. I'm interested in light as a line.
That's a question down here from our Dean, Greg Hull.
Thanks again for being here tonight. And it's been enjoyable to listen to you talk about the work. I was thinking as I moved through the gallery, the experiences I was having with the work. But when you mentioned Harry Portoya, I was thinking about being around his work and getting to listen to it and that immersive quality. So it was nice to sort of have that sort of access to it. But the thing that I actually wanted to ask about, you mentioned Dan Flavin, who does a lot of work with fluorescent lights. Is that someone who you've worked with? I was curious. That would be a really interesting conversation in my mind for you and Dan to be in a conversation.
Well, I went to one of Dan's shows, and I was asked if I wanted to be introduced to Dan, and I didn't want to be introduced to him. My good friend Tiffany Bell worked for him for a long time, and he made some really incredible pieces through his life, and he's an artist I had a lot of respect for. But my interest was more in a guy named Francois Morellet, who worked with light also and never got the airplay that he should have gotten through his career. And he was working with a lot of randomness with light. Francois Morellet is his name. A very interesting sculptor.
Fantastic. Well, we will look into him. I'm not familiar with him, although light is something that I've worked with. My mentors I've worked with. I worked with an artist named Dale Eldred. Natural light, sunlight was the primary vehicle he used. And I was curious if you've used daylight, if you've used sunlight as a light source with.
I've done a lot of solar pieces, so I'm interested. I do a lot, and solars to me is a very interesting form to work with, and material to work with, because you have not just a light, then you have to think about the structure of the collectors and everything, and how you incorporate that into the work.
Thank you. And just to say it, Dale would always say, all sculptors have always worked under the same sun. So
Yeah,
part of the
there you
same
go.
family. Right, thank you.
Probably time for another question. Anyone else? Yep. Veronica.
So I always like to ask this to, anyone really. Is there a moment in your career that you felt like this was like your big break? Like this is like kind of what you wanted from your artistic journey, like a piece or a show that just really made you feel fulfilled?
It's always the next piece that makes you feel fulfilled. You
Yeah,
know,
that's true.
I mean, I think that a Japanese artist who I think he pronounced his name Hokusai said it best. He felt that all his work through his life didn't matter. When in his 50s, he got a lot of airplay, but he said he didn't even think he was starting to make good work until he was in his 70s. And so he said that work wasn't worthy, the work he got all the attention from. And I know another sculptor that I look up to, and he said that all his work that's in museums isn't that important. It's what he's working on now. So I think that when you look at your whole body of work, there are moments that you get, pieces that have that are more important to you, but that doesn't mean they're more important to the public. That's a big deal, that sometimes the way the public looks at your work and you look at it, that doesn't always, there's no definite straight line between the two. And a lot of artists, this is really important, a lot of artists develop in their studios and a lot of artists develop in public. And as a young artist, I think you should really think about your own development, how you're going to proceed through your career. Because a lot of artists I know that were really successful for a moment were like in it as a sprint. And being an artist is more like it's a marathon. It's a long journey. It's not a short story. It's a novel.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Anyone else? We have one in the back.
Hi, first of all, I totally love your work. And second of all, I have done a lot of work with light moving. So
Mhm.
I've used some of the tapes, the lit tapes and stuff like that. I noticed in your show, most of the art is solidly there. Have you worked with moving light through an environment?
I'm the only
Kinetic.
piece, I did some fiber optic pieces that went into like bodies of water that were in that show I mentioned earlier, Tulip's Hysteria Coordinating. So there was a disc of color going through a tube. And then later on, there's a really wonderful artist, part of the Gutai group called Sadamaso Montanago. And he did pieces that were hanging color pieces. And recently the Guggenheim had a show of the Gutai group. Now, Montanago's work inspired me to do a fiber optic piece that went into a bag of water that changed color, but it didn't really shift the color in a room as much as it did internally. So, the environment, the light of the pieces create light in the environment. I don't know. I'm not interested in changing, like shifting light, like wall lights and stuff like that, projecting.
Yeah, if anyone has a chance here to go down to the photo labs downstairs or the photo area, at the end of the hall, there's a young student who has a projection piece down there that is really kind of amazing. I have to say, it caught my attention. Check it out. Another light piece in the building. Jim, I want to thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Well,
And I wish you could have been here in person. And I'm sorry we didn't hook up when I was up in your neck of the woods, but and I'm really, really incredibly sorry that you're not able to ship that smoked eel and trout to me. But maybe some
Yeah.
other time.
well, one thing I'd like to do is thank you and appreciate your help and support, T. Michaels, Creighton, Michael, T. Michael Martin, Sammy Yates, all you guys have been so patient and with the work because it's very complicated. And I'm not there, but my heart's there.
It was an honor. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Yeah.